Hi, and welcome to Hot Topics. In this series, we follow a narrative called Don't Do Digital. And the idea is to go behind that narrative and actually understand a little bit more from the people who are at the sharp end of the digital revolution. We hear from leaders who have this as their core mission, their core statement. And really, we want to understand about how digital is transforming their businesses. Today, I'm delighted to have Christina Scott with me. Welcome, Christina.
Thank you.
Until recently, Christina was the CTO of News International. And I say until recently because I understand now you have two jobs. You're the CTO of News UK and the Deputy CTO of the whole group.
Corp, that's right, yes.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Sounds like a big role. Sounds like two big roles.
Yes.
Hot Topics is really all about peer-to-peer networking and learning from peers. And actually, as I say, going behind the role. And so I think for the people watching and listening today, it would probably be awesome if you could just give us a little sort of insight into how you've come into this role and the kind of steps that got you there.
Okay, thank you. I think I've been in technology for more years than I probably care to mention, having started as a mechanical engineer, quickly shifted to technology. And when I started in technology, it was very much about back office systems, until I hit the world of media and found that actually there's a lot of fun that you could have, particularly as the digital disruption was happening and media has been heavily disrupted. So I've worked in a number of media companies, ITV Digital, the BBC. I worked for a subsidiary of News UK originally. And I think the thing that I've always enjoyed is really trying as a technologist to try and help businesses survive when they're being disrupted. So I've been in the sort of cutting edge of digital for a number of years now.
Excellent. And being in an organisation like News UK, which is the home of the Times and the Sun, but is a multimedia organisation. What's an average day like for a CTO in such an organisation? Is there such a thing?
So firstly I should say that the title CTO in itself is interesting because I'm responsible for technology, obviously, but also for data, for product, and the strategic relationships with the big tech companies, so the Googles and Facebooks of the world. And so I think that it's gone from being a much slimmer role to more and more, as digital becomes more important, to the CTO perhaps owning slightly more disciplines. And I'm not sure there is an average day, if I'm honest. We have the two publishing businesses, the Times and the Sun. We have an ad tech company, Unruly, and we've also acquired Wireless Group, which is TalkSport and a number of different radio stations. And so one day you may be talking about cybersecurity threats or business continuity. The next day you may be talking about how we survive in changing our business model and the type of product that we need to build. So it's incredibly varied. And
with all of that variety going on, and we've called this series Don't Do Digital, because there seems to be a lot of talk, particularly in the media and in the technology media and actually in the mainstream media, about the digital revolution that's going on out there. We hear about lots of people doing things, hiring chief digital officers, doing big digital programs. But when you go behind those conversations, actually it's quite difficult to nail down exactly what digital means to those companies, what they actually want to be as a result. How do you approach that whole digital story?
So I think that it can be incredibly dangerous for a company to look as digital as something on the side. Because most companies are probably still making quite a lot of revenue from what is considered to be their legacy business, and digital is a much smaller revenue stream. But the trouble is we all really know that digital is the future, and so when you look at my kids, they don't make this distinction between digital and the rest of the world. It's just how they live. And so we really, as companies, we need to embrace digital as just the new business models that we have to succeed in. And I think the danger of chief digital officers or placing digital under one person in an organisation means that actually it's somehow siloed and special, whereas you really need your whole company to embrace digital and to understand how to work in what is now just the world. I don't see it as digital and something else. It's just how the world is.
It's absolutely true, and it's a great point. You know, there's a lot of talk about ownership of digital, and I find it hard to understand how anyone can own digital. Surely it must be how a company behaves or how a company acts. But you mentioned data in your description. Is data the key? Is data the thing that links everything together?
So the promise of data has been with us for a few years, and I think that the trouble with data, a lot of companies set off and they thought about data as a technology problem to solve, and we spent several years looking at big data and building amazing systems, but actually the real key to data, and I think data is really important, is actually how you drive worth from the data. So it's not an exercise in collecting loads of data and being able to process it quickly. It's actually, how do we deliver a customer experience, or how do we deliver an increase in revenue that is driven by an understanding from data? So it's the usage of data rather than just the exercise of it. And I think that that's where many companies have got a little bit lost. So I think that in a previous company, the data scientists there used to say you can drive a lot of really good value from actually really rubbish systems and Excel. I mean, you can use Excel and drive quite a lot of understanding around a subset of data. And so I think that actually having the capability to do that translation is really important.
And is that part of the challenge, that you know, to make the most out of the systems you already have and extract the data out of those systems? Is that what you approach first, or do you look outside?
So I think understanding what you have and having people who can spot the opportunity, and then they can translate that into if there's other data sets that it would make sense for you to have and complement the data that you already have, or in your product to build in capabilities to get the first-party data that you need. And also to understand with GDPR coming in next year, to understand the importance of the relationship with the customer, which, you know, the big tech companies have done brilliantly. The relationship with the customer and being able to collect the right data. But also, I think more and more companies are going to think about the ethics of collecting the data and what they do with the data, and I think that's going to become a much more important issue in the future.
And is that something that comes up a lot? I mean, being a media organisation, you know, data is not just, you know, the backbone of what you do. It's actually, you know, in part the product you produce. How's that? How does that debate sort of take place in an organisation like News UK? So
it obviously does take place, and I think that there's definitely with editorial and the independence of editorial teams, you have to be very careful in terms of the commercial part of the organisation and the editorial part of the organisation. And obviously customer data is not always anonymised for any use outside the company. And I think that one of the things that we need to think about is why we're collecting data and the purpose of collecting it, and not just collecting it for the sake of collecting it. And I think that when you look at the amount of information some companies have about us, I think that will be brought into question. So, you know, what is the point of them collecting all that information so that they can track your every move? And I do think that that's where GDPR and e-privacy, data privacy it's come from that feeling of actually, do we want people to know everything about us? And is it right that they should know that?
It's a difficult one. You know, my children will trade their identity for free Wi-Fi.
Yes.
So many do.
Or your identity. My children trade my identity for free Wi-Fi.
They trade my credit card for free Wi-Fi. But this idea, I mean, GDPR is a fabulous initiative, but the mechanics of individuals being able to go to an organisation and say, well, actually, I want you to find every piece of information about me, and when you've told me you've got it, then I'll tell you what I want you to do with it. That must be a huge undertaking.
It is, and I think it's huge for all organisations, and so it's obviously a big focus for most organisations at the moment in terms of thinking what their data strategy is, as well as a whole world of legal firms popping up to help advise.
Yes, and probably charging a fortune to do it as well. It's interesting. We've dived almost immediately into data in a topic that's called "Don't Do Digital," because I think certainly I find when I'm talking to people about roles inside organisations, the D in chief digital and chief data tend to get superimposed all the time. I mean, inside news, is there a demarcation between the data and the digital, or do you see it all together? Do your board understand it as one thing?
I think they understand the different disciplines and the importance of different disciplines, but data does go across the whole organisation. So it provides insight to editorial teams, it provides insight for marketing, for advertising teams, it provides insight and opportunities operationally to drive efficiencies. So I think that because it cuts across, it's one of those things that actually everyone has to understand. And while someone may have a chief data officer title, it doesn't mean that they're the only person who can understand data, because, you know, ideally more and more people in the company would be data champions and really thinking about how they use data intelligently.
Moving topics on, so another theme that comes out whenever we're talking about digital to people is this this theme of talent and the apparent sort of the quoted skills gap in the UK, and I'm sure it's more than just the UK. Yet when we look around London, we're overlooking the Tower of London and London Bridge now, but from here down to Shoreditch and all around, and actually in hubs all around the UK, there seems to be talent everywhere. There are startups popping up all over the place. So what is it about this talent gap? Is it just big corporate complaining, or is there genuinely a problem?
I think there's genuinely a problem in some areas, and data is actually a classic example of where data scientists are quite hard to get. But there's lots of iOS developers. There's lots of gaps, and so I do think there's a proper gap, and it is a challenge. But I think it's also how corporates tend to approach it. So I think historically corporates have been quite narrow-minded in terms of how they look to recruit. I think that job specs would typically say we want you to have a 2-1 in a computer science degree and this sort of thing. And I think that we're beginning to wake up to the fact that technology is a broad range of people with a broad range of skills, and actually we need to be more creative in terms of taking people with potential and helping to train them up, and to be less sort of fixated on maybe they've done this degree from this university. So here at News, we've put in a sort of rehaul of our talent management programme, looking at how we recruit, our reputation externally, the type of skills we're trying to attract, and looking at how our job specs are written, our recruitment processes. We wanted to be able to get from a job spec to offer in 2 weeks. So we are competing with startups.
Absolutely.
And corporates don't do that, they take months. But we can't afford to do that. We've worked with a number of organisations looking at how you retrain people, so Makers Academy do a boot camp for developers, Pavigo do something similar with PhD students in data science. So looking to take people from different backgrounds, and also looking at, for me, gender is really important, and trying to attract more women into technology. So we've worked with FDM on a back-to-work scheme, looking at people who've been out for maybe 5-6 years because they've had kids. So just looking at a number of different avenues and being more open-minded to the marketplace.
And that's a very broad set of initiatives, primarily geared about taking talent into the organisation, which is clearly one of the routes. Yeah. Is there another route around how large corporates engage with the startup community and work more collaboratively with them, help them through? Having worked with a few, they're somewhat, I say onerous would be too polite a word for some of the procurement processes that we've come across.
Yes.
How does big corporate learn to engage better? What are you guys doing?
So I think there are definitely lessons, and I see a lot of startups. I think there's lessons on both sides. I think that startups typically come to sell you their vision of how they're going to rule the world with their particular app that they've already got in mind, and perhaps don't spend enough time thinking about how it applies to the corporate world. And corporates are not great at engaging with startups. So here in News UK, we're looking, we're just in the process of looking at setting up an incubator so that we can work with a number of different startups. we've acquired Unruly, which was a
Yes.
startup. So obviously that's one way of doing it.
Bring them in,
Just buy them.
absolutely.
But how you partner with people and actually trying to just close that gap and understanding more, I think is really important.
So there's the recruitment process that's changing. There's partnerships. There's also the organisations that you mentioned earlier on in the interview about the particularly media, the Facebooks and the Googles of this world, who are hoovering talent into their organisations.
Yes.
How does a media company work with these guys? I mean, work with companies that are one day your competitor, the next day your partner, the day after your the people who are stealing your talent. How do you build relationships with these organisations?
So I think if you take any of those organisations, we tend to have a relationship with them on many different layers. So if you look at Google, we use their ad tech, we use Google Cloud, we use BigQuery, we use Gmail. So we use a number of technologies from Google. And we have a great relationship with them on that aspect. But then also if you look at the advertising models, obviously we're slightly challenged, and a lot of the advertising revenue is going to Google and Facebook. And I think that we want to have a good relationship with the big tech companies because it's really important. We're reliant on their platforms, but they're also reliant on our content. And I think perhaps it's felt in the media world that reliance hasn't been as recognised as it could be. Media organisations, as you know, spend an awful lot of money on producing quality content, and it's not cheap. And so we have to find business models that work for the producers of the content and not just the distributors of the content. So that's the slight position of tension that we find ourselves in. But we have great conversations with all those companies, and I think that there's ongoing discussions and recognition of where each other stand. Do
you get a sense that they're moving their stance?
I think yes. No, I think so. I think because if you think about back to the world of where a lot of content production started in the world of TV. Content was commissioned for TV, and actually you can see the new players of Amazon and Netflix coming in, and actually they're doing just that again for TV content. So why is it different for video content or for text content? And so I think that I think things are starting. So you hear every so often that some deals, and Facebook Live, you'll see that they will have paid some companies for Facebook Live content. So I think that there are pockets of it happening, and I think if monetization is through advertising revenue, that's brilliant, as long as it happens. So I think that if the promise is that there's advertising revenue linked to the content and that covers the cost of the content, then we don't have a problem with that.
But the promise has always been that online advertising revenues will supplant those, and it's never happened.
No, exactly.
So do you see a point where it can only be a volume play, or can you see scenarios where more paid for content will become the norm?
So I think, you can already see in the world of media that more companies have moved towards a subscription model with their customers, and I think if the platforms could help support subscription models, which they typically haven't, that helps for that model. But subscription models will not work for all content, as I think we put the sun behind a paywall and we brought it out again. And so I think there's different models, revenue models, that we have to look at and see how we support the different models.
Our last question, which is actually about the tenure of the CIO. And with all of these new roles coming, chief marketing, I think the most recent one I saw was a CMTO, chief marketing technology officer.
Right.
But there's CIOs, CDOs, CTOs. The one thing that seems to be consistent is that the tenure, the time spent in roles, seems to be reducing. And I think the latest stat is it's coming down to nearly 2 years as the average for a CIO in role.
Right.
Are we becoming a bit like the Premier League? Is it that you have to come in and it be instant success? Or, can you get anything done in 2 years? Gosh,
so I better do my CV up then if it's too... I think 2 years is a bit short, personally. I think that with technology, I think you can make a big impact, and I'd like to think in the 15 months I've been here that I have had some impact. So I think you can come in and you can do the quick wins, and you can look at the position, but I think that there are some things that take longer, and I think one of the hardest things, particularly if you're talking about digital and if technology is at the centre of trying to create some digital transformation, I think cultural changes are really hard. And they take time, and I don't think that those can be done in 2 years. And so I think that you can probably come in, you can do the quick wins, and then you can probably leave after that and say you've had some success. So it's not to say that people who've moved on after 2 years haven't done a good job, but I think if you're really committed to a company, it's probably slightly longer than that, in my view.
Possibly that is the new model, to come in, to lay the foundations, to transform, and then take it forward from there. Christina, it's been wonderful to see you again and wonderful to speak to you. Thank you so much for taking the time.
Thank you.
My name's been Ian Cohen. This has been Hot Topics on Don't Do Digital.